Welcome to Notebook Summaries. Today we're diving into the complex and fascinating history of Fiji.
Okay, when you hear Fiji, you're probably thinking of a tropical paradise, right? White sand, clear blue water, but that's just the surface. The real story of Fiji is this incredible saga defined by waves of new arrivals, each one shaping the island's destiny. So to get our heads around how modern Fiji came to be, we're going to walk through 6 key chapters. We'll start at the ancient crossroads, hit the colonial collision, see how the colony was forged, walk the road to independence, untangle a cycle of coups, and then see where Fiji is today. Let's get into it. All right, let's kick things off at the very beginning, with the first people to call these islands home. You see, for centuries, Fiji wasn't some isolated place. It was a buzzing crossroads in the middle of the Pacific. First, you had the Lapita people show up, these incredible Austronesian navigators, sometime around 1500 BC. Then, maybe 1,000 years later, a new wave of Melanesian people arrived. And by the 10th century, the huge Tu'i-Tonga Empire was extending its reach, bringing in Polynesian customs. All these layers building on top of each other created this really unique Fijian culture. And we're not talking about a simple culture here. This was seriously sophisticated stuff. They built these huge, beautiful sailing canoes called drua. They had unique architecture, complex social rules, and really important traditions like drinking yakana, you might know it as kava, in ceremonies. They even used polished sperm whale teeth, called tabua, as a kind of high-stakes currency. Pretty amazing. Okay, so you have this vibrant, established culture, and then everything changes. The 17th century rolls around, and Europeans arrive. This is the moment, the collision, that would completely transform Fiji's future. So, how do you justify showing up and taking over? Well, the early colonists and missionaries found a powerful tool, the idea of cannibalism. They created this narrative of Fiji as a paradise wasted on savage cannibals. It was a story that basically gave them a green light, a so-called moral reason to come in and civilize the islands. But here's where it gets really interesting. We have this quote from a colonial medical officer, William McGregor, who said it was done to show supreme hatred, not because it was some kind of meal. This tells us it was likely a very rare, ritualistic thing you did to a hated enemy in war. It completely blows up that simple, sensationalized story the colonists were pushing. Okay, so with that justification in place, the stage was set for a full-on colonial takeover. Let's look at how internal wars and outside pressure led to Fiji becoming a British colony. The main player here is a chief named Kakobau. He's powerful, but he's in a tough spot. He's got other chiefs fighting him, and he owes a ton of money to American debt collectors. So what does he do? On October 10th, 1874, he cedes Fiji to the British Crown. It probably seemed like a good solution at the time, but it immediately kicked off 2 events that would change everything. First, a public health catastrophe. After the ceremony, Chief Kakabau's ship came back from Sydney carrying measles. The new colonial administrators failed to quarantine the ship, and the disease just tore through the islands. The Fijians had no immunity. 40,000 people died. That's about 1/3 of the entire indigenous population. Just gone. And that brings us to the second consequence. With so many indigenous Fijians dead, and the British wanting to keep the rest in their traditional villages, there was a massive labor shortage on the new sugar plantations. So the British looked to another part of their empire for a solution: India. They created the Indian indenture system. So from 1879 to 1916, they brought in more than 60,000 indentured laborers from India. And here's the key. Most of them stayed after their contracts were up. This wasn't just about finding workers anymore. This was a fundamental demographic shift. It created a multi-ethnic Fiji and, you guessed it, laid the groundwork for decades of political conflict to come. All right, fast forward into the 20th century. Fiji is starting to think about independence. But as it does, those tensions between the indigenous Fijians and the now well-established Indo-Fijian community are really starting to heat up. And the number one issue, land. The British had made it so that over 80% of the land was owned collectively by indigenous Fijians. That's great for them, but what about the Indo-Fijians? They were the backbone of the sugar industry, the country's economic engine, but they couldn't own the land they farmed. They had to lease it. You can imagine the kind of resentment and friction that created. So when Fiji gets its independence in 1970, they try to solve this problem with the constitution. They came up with this really complex system called communal constituencies. Basically, they set aside a certain number of seats in parliament for each ethnicity. The idea was to create balance, but what it actually did was cement the ethnic divide right into the heart of the government. And with a system like that, well, stability was never really in the cards. All those tensions that had been simmering for decades were about to boil over, in the form of multiple military coups. It happened again and again and again. In 1987, Lieutenant Colonel Sitiveni Rabuka overthrew a government that was seen as pro-Indo-Fijian. Then, in 2000, a civilian coup led by George Speight took the first Indo-Fijian prime minister hostage. And in 2006, Commodore Frank Bainimarama seized power. I mean, think about that. 3 times in under 20 years, the democratic process was just thrown out the window. And if you look at the why behind each coup, you see a clear pattern. The 1987 coup was about fear of Indo-Fijian political power. The 2001 was driven by pure ethno-nationalism. The 2006 coup had its own triggers, but at the end of the day, they were all about the same thing, a fundamental fight over who gets to control Fiji's destiny. And every bit of it traces right back to the decisions made during the colonial era. So, wow. After all that, where does that leave Fiji today? Have they finally figured out a way to break this cycle of coups? Well, after the 2006 coup, the leader, Frank Bainimarama, actually tried to hit the reset button. He completely got rid of the old constitution in 2009. Then in 2013, he brought in a new one. The whole point was to try and move past the ethnic-based politics that had caused so much trouble. And by 2014, they held elections again, and Bainimarama's party won. And one of the most important changes in that new constitution was about identity. You see this here. The term Italke was made the official name for indigenous Fijians. And the word Fijian? That was redefined to mean every single citizen of the country, no matter their ethnicity. It might just seem like words, but that's a massive conceptual shift, an attempt to build a single national identity. But history has a funny way of coming back around. In 2022, Fiji had another election. And who won? Sitiveni Rabuka. Yes, the same guy who led the very first coup back in 1987. But this time, he became prime minister through a democratic election. You can't make this stuff up. And that really brings Fiji's story full circle, leaving us with this huge question. What does it mean when the man who started the cycle of coups returns to power democratically? Is it a sign that Fiji has finally moved past its old divisions? Or is it a warning that the past is never really that far away? To keep exploring complex histories like this one, subscribe to Notebook Summaries or check out another video in our Quick Country Histories playlist.